Alejandro Garnacho just posted a picture online in a Aston Villa shirt. Bear in mind, he's still a Manchester United player, with Rashford number 9 on the back end. Looking at the immediate fan reaction, I would say that the loudest voices in the fan base are fairly annoyed at this post that he's done. Whereas a few other fans have been a little bit more nuanced. In this video, I want to talk a little bit about what my reaction to this whole saga is, but I also want to talk more broadly about Garnacho, his performances across the season, and whether or not it's the right decision to sell him. And if it is the right decision to sell him, who might benefit from his quality, and if he's even a good player at all. I know people are divided on Garnacho's quality in general, but I have my own opinions on that as a football analyst, and I want to talk a little bit more objectively to that point, because I know a lot of the videos around this topic and around Garnacho in general are going to be very subjective and very fan-based and very emotional, which is not a criticism, obviously. I think if you're a fan, enjoy the sport emotionally and experience the sport emotionally, but sometimes people want to watch a little bit more of a neutral or a more balanced perspective on things, and that's hopefully what I can provide in this video. Look, I would be lying if I said that this didn't come across as spicy, to say the least. It's certainly something that starts conversations, and I think he knows that this is going to cause a reaction. It's going to start a conversation. And look, even if in his heart of hearts he is just trying to show Rashford some support, he knows that it's going to gain some sort of reaction. I think we need to provide some context to this whole situation. I saw this tweet on the timeline which kind of inspired me to make this video before I went to bed, so I have a day off tomorrow. But Mark Goldbridge posted this tweet, 1.7 million views. I mean, it certainly started a conversation. In his opinion, he certainly has an influential voice in that Manchester United fan base, and he said, if this is real, he's an absolute prat. So much for all the fans that supported you, literally going rogue and sinking his value to get moving. To that, I actually replied, what did I reply? I replied, his value sunk when it was reported publicly that Amrim had told him in front of the squad that he had no place in the team and to find a new club or something to that effect, because I was paraphrasing. And somebody mentioned to me that, would I be happy if Jack Grealish was wearing a Liverpool shirt? My point wasn't necessarily about him wearing the shirt in that comment. My point was more about the point Goldbridge made in the sense that he was sinking his value to get a move. Now, I don't think he's sinking his value to get a move. I think Garnacho will get a move some way or the other. I think his value was sunk already when this happened. So we'll go through some of the quotes that Amrim apparently said to Garnacho. Following the defeat to Spurs in the Europa League final, it says that sources with knowledge of the matter, speaking anonymously to protect relationships, indicate that Amrim addressed players at the club's Carrington training ground on Saturday to inform them of his own plans and in front of the group of those for Garnacho. So look, he did single Garnacho out, and he did single him out to basically tell him that he had to go and find a new club, which, look, in the wake of such a terrible result, feels like almost he felt like he had to scapegoat somebody. And this is not to say Garnacho's not without fault. His brother and apparently Garnacho himself have been the source of some antics around the club, whether that's just posting things publicly, liking tweets or pictures publicly that start conversation, and often unwarranted conversation that loses focus away from what truly matters at a football club at the highest level. So look, I'm not saying they're without fault, but what I'm saying is something like this being posted publicly when your sources within the club are speaking to journalists at The Athletic, for example. Clubs know, and big clubs now know, that Garnacho is definitely leaving. If he doesn't leave, he's going to be ostracized from that club, because the manager has explicitly said in front of everybody else that, look, you're not part of my plans, you need to find a new club. Now, imagine a scenario in which Garnacho is forced to say it because other teams don't buy him. If your manager then goes back on his word, it almost looks like he doesn't have power over the dressing room and of his own convictions in what he said. So look, when you say something that strongly and when it goes out into the public, you have to get rid of that player now. Garnacho is leaving, that's fact. Now teams across the world know that he's definitely leaving. There's no place for him at Manchester United. So why would they bid high when they know that Manchester United have to sell him? Manchester United's only hope of getting real value, and if you go back to what Mark Goldbridge said in terms of sinking his value, look, his value sunk already because teams know that Manchester United have to sell. The only way that Manchester United could probably get a big money bid for Garnacho is if there's various competition from different clubs who are all trying to buy Garnacho. Now, if I briefly talk about the actual kit and him wearing the kit, I wouldn't want one of my players to do this if they were playing, for example, in my team in the middle of the season, and the kit that they are wearing and the name that they're wearing on the back is a player who's also been ostracized and been told to leave the club, because obviously I think the club comes before anything else when you are a collective, and this sort of division in the camp makes things so much worse. One, for the coach, but secondly for the fans, and thirdly for the players themselves. That division and that lack of moving in one direction for a club is what frays and what causes a lot of clubs to kind of fail and be distracted and not have their eyes on a general focused plan. And Manchester United have had a lot of those dramatic situations over the last year and the last few years for sure. So I wouldn't like this if this happened in the general season. From Garnacho's perspective, he's been told that he has to leave. He's been told that there's no place for him at the club, and he probably feels hard done by him. Now, he's not come out and said explicitly, look, that manager's disrespected me, or I don't like this manager, or I don't like this other player. He's very subtly and very subliminally, I wouldn't say subtly actually, it's very on the nose, but he's sort of subliminally kind of shown his allegiance to Marcus Rashford in the situation and started conversations that kind of put a division between him, the club, and people higher up in the club. I don't think it's the most professional thing to do, and I think it probably deters other clubs when they look at Garnacho and they might think, look, he's a troublemaker. He might start drama publicly that we don't want our club to be involved in. And one thing I'll actually mention on this topic is that Liverpool often target characters who are really professional, and you'll never see a Liverpool player in the last few years post things like this. They're very good at keeping their camp together. They're very good at preventing stories and little antics like this from coming out into the media in the first instance. And that's why I think they've had a lot of success. They're a very strong cultural unit, and that's from, the higher ups all the way down to the general staff. You won't find Liverpool leaking too many stories to the press, that they don't want to go out there. It's very much club mouthpieces speaking directly to very high level journalists, whereas Manchester United seems to be a little bit of a circus at times. Look, all of that is to say, I don't agree with Garnacho for this. It probably deters clubs from wanting to sign him, knowing that drama is attached to him if he does have the capacity to do something like this. But if I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt, if you've been told that, look, you're not part of my plans in front of anybody, it's a humiliating thing, it's an embarrassing thing, you've tried your hardest. And I think he's actually played well this season, and I'll get into talking about his general performances across this season and how he's been played and where he might be able to find joy, what his level might be in world football. But I think he's played decently well this season, and he's been humiliated in that way. So if that's the case, then he doesn't owe Manchester United anything in terms of trying to get them a better transfer fee. Why would he? It doesn't necessarily make sense. I think fans are generally more attached to the club than even players can be, especially when you're talking about, for example, Trent Alexander-Arnold leaving. A lot of fans were really angry that he didn't get them a transfer fee, and they were booing him even after he'd put in so many years of effort and won so many trophies with them. And it was actually his teammates, Mohamed Salah, Szoboszlai, etc., who were defending him. Jurgen Klopp was defending Trent Alexander-Arnold. So the people within the club, the coaches and the players themselves, are often less emotional about these things than fans are. And look, why would a player feel like he has to get Manchester United the best value and the most money if Manchester United is a business, if he's been humiliated publicly by his employers? If you're thinking of it from that perspective, if my workplace humiliated me, I don't necessarily have to respect them in the same way that I would have if everything was amicable. So in that sense, look, I kind of understand that he doesn't need to, and he probably doesn't want to show respect to Manchester United because he feels hard done by them, essentially. But we'll move on from talking about the kit. I do want to talk a little bit about his profile in general and his performances across the season, because I think I'm probably in a camp separate from a lot of Manchester United fans in the sense that I actually think he is probably a little bit better than some United fans do think he is. I don't think a lot of people and a lot of fans judge players on sort of what they could be. I think a lot of them judge players on what they actually see, and what they remember most often is the final action. And we all know Garnacho's been iffy with his final action. He's often got big chances and got into good spaces, but then he's missed those chances often. And for fans, that's the most frustrating thing. For me, as a football analyst, I really think that that's something that points towards being a green flag more than a red flag. And I'll get into that in a little second. I just want to touch upon this quote actually from Amad Diallo, who said that he wants Alejandro Garnacho to remain a Manchester United player into the next season because the team needs good players. His actual quote was, Alejandro is a really good player and we need good players in the team. I know Garner really well. I hope to have Garner next season. It is not really a big issue for the team. And this was actually in pre-season following the reported quotes from Amrim in front of the rest of the players at Carrington that Garnacho had to leave. So look, this is a quote from Ahmad. knowing that Garnacho has been told that he needs to find a new club, but still wanting him because he identifies him as a good player. And when I think of the club culture that is needed to get teams to be more successful, this is only one part of it, but you need teammates who like each other as teammates, that you need teammates who respect the quality of other players, not to get annoyed at them, but to feel the joy to play football with other really high-level players. And Garnacho and Ahmad have a good connection between themselves, and obviously it's evident the fact that if your fellow professional thinks you're a good footballer, then I would err on the side of thinking that you're certainly a good footballer, because ball is no ball. We'll move on from that and we'll talk a little bit more about Garnacho's actual performances himself. I'm going to reference some stats because it's quicker than getting images and videos to illustrate my point. But bear in mind, I'm basing my interpretation of stats on what I've seen with my eyes. I always contextualize it with the eye test. First and foremost, I don't like looking at stats first and then going backwards. I always look at the performances and then I have my idea of what I want to say. And then I'll look at the stats just so it's easy to illustrate for you guys watching this video or reading an article or a long form analysis. So look, Manchester United, I've got Alejandro Garnacho's stats for the last few seasons. But what I want to highlight, particularly from last season, is his XG. Now, 9 XG with expected assists of 3.47 in 2,176 minutes, which is about 23 full matches, so 23 full 90s. So in 23 full 90s, he has an expected goals and assists of 12, which is about a goal contribution every other game. For a winger, that's wildly impressive, especially a young winger. I know that people have big expectations, almost tainted by the likes of Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi and the numbers that they were putting up. And, every time a new young player comes onto the scene, like Lamine Yamal, for example, we get, desensitized to their numbers. It's very impressive, particularly in a system, actually, where he's not getting in favourable zones. He's typically a left winger in a 4-3-3 who comes inside. He's often been played as a wing back, and he's still putting up these numbers, or as an inside winger in a 3-4-2-1, which is not necessarily a system he's familiar with, but he's still putting up underlying numbers of that fashion. His goals, he scored 6 goals off of an XG of 9.44, so he's underperforming, which talks to the point that he's obviously missing some chances. But to me, I'm looking at these numbers here, the underlying numbers, and seeing the quality that he does have, the positions that he does get into, because if you do get into those positions, that's the hardest thing in world football. At some point, you can probably start putting some of those chances away, but it's very hard for some players to learn that innate collection of skills that allow you to get a lot of those chances, reading the game, knowing when to sprint, knowing when to time your run, knowing which areas that the ball's going to fall into. And Garnacho's got all of those. I'm a huge fan of players like Raheem Sterling and Vinicius Jr., although they miss chances as well, because they do the exact same things. And every season, they'll consistently score a good amount of goals. Even if they're missing some, on the grand scheme of things, they're massively contributing to the success of their team because they can reliably get into goal scoring and goal assisting positions. The season prior to that, a little bit more in terms of his minutes, 2,601 minutes, but an XG of almost 10 and an expected assist of almost 6, 7 goals and 4 assists. Now I'm looking at that and thinking, your goals and assists, if you're pushing 16 goals and assists combined at this young age, you're a brilliant footballer, especially in the Premier League. It's a hard league, in a team that doesn't necessarily suit your qualities, in a team that's going through a poorer patch than it has done for many years. That's very good. They're very good numbers. And when I combine it with my eye test, I'm always massively impressed by the fact that he can get into those chances even when the game's going tough, even when he's brought on as a substitute and the game momentum is against Manchester United. He ends up forcing the issue. He ends up getting the ball in behind and he ends up taking shots away. And for me, it's probably a matter of time before something clicks, as long as he can get his personality and environment sorted out, as long as he's got a coach that empowers him and believes in him and trusts him to play, then you can elevate that player to the next level. But he's got so many of those underlying qualities that are really impressive to me. The last thing I want to mention numbers-wise is I'm looking at the goals and assists, the expected goals and assists combined for players at Manchester United. Now, if we sort by most to least, this is last season. Scott McTominay only played 2 games and Anthony only played 119 minutes or 8 games. So if we exclude those who obviously have the most expected goals and assists per 90 minutes, so per minutes combined, because they had such few minutes, that number is going to be elevated. But Garnacho with 2,100 minutes is that the highest at Manchester United. That showcases his ability to get into areas where he makes things happen, and even if he's not putting all of those chances away, that's wildly impressive. It's even more than Bruno Fernandes, who admittedly had played deeper, played in central midfield areas, and not been able to showcase that attacking quality in the same fashion that he has in previous seasons. But Garnacho's top for players who have played significant minutes. Fernandes is second, Xerxes third, and then Mason Mount's not played too many minutes. Amad Diallo played even fewer minutes than Garnacho as well, if we're looking at the numbers purely. So Garnacho is really impressive on his underlyings. If we look at, non-penalty goals as well, which I like to look at because obviously the penalties and the set pieces can inflate some of those numbers, not to take away from the difficulty of actually scoring them and putting them away. You have to do it, and it's hard to do it. But 8 non-penalty goals for Amad as the top scorer, 6 for Garnacho, just beneath him. Look, they're valuable numbers that you're missing out on in terms of shots per 90 and getting, your shots away early. Scott McTominay again, few minutes. Anthony, few minutes. But Garnacho is there right again, making things happen, forcing the issue. He's a quick player. He can run in behind well. He can play against the low block to a decent quality. For me, I think he's a player who should move on because obviously there is a sour relationship now between Garnacho and Manchester United. Once you've said that he has to go because otherwise you're undermining your reputation as a manager by bringing him back in. And look, if we look at McTominay as an example, he's a brilliant footballer. He was profiled incorrectly at Manchester United. I think Garnacho's moving towards being profiled incorrectly if Amorim stays and this 3-4-2-1 is held quite rigidly. Ideally you want to get Garnacho in a system with a manager who can kind of put his arm around him and nurture that, almost bad boy streak. I don't want to use that term lightly. I don't necessarily know Garnacho as a person, but there's been a few things in the media, maybe it's media talk, that indicate he might bring a little bit of trouble where he is or based on who he's around. But he's an incredible footballer to me and somebody with masses of potential. I know Man United fans might disagree with that, but look, trust me, I said the same thing about Elanga when he left, said the same thing about McTominay. These are players with brilliant quality and you just need the right environment to get that quality out of them. McTominay and Elanga to me were probably a bit better personalities, able to succeed more easily, I think, based on their personalities and how they would integrate into a new system. But Garnacho, for all of his potential concerns around his personality, he's got a brilliant mindset and he's somebody who wants to be the best, and he probably sees himself as one of the best in his team and someone who could be one of the best in world football. I know he's heavily inspired by Cristiano, and with players like that you need a certain tact. You need a team that has good leaders throughout it that can kind of nurture and guide him, whereas at Manchester United it's a team that are a little bit mismatched at the moment, lacking leaders, lacking stability. The fan base is very hard on you, especially publicly, especially on Twitter, especially on Instagram comments. And I think that really takes a toll on players who are going to be consuming social media content, even if they pretend like they don't, especially if it's in a language that they can understand. I would always encourage players to move to countries where they don't necessarily understand the main language of the team that they play for. I think that's why Sancho probably did so well at Dortmund. If he had a bad game, is he going to be reading comments in German? I don't know. That's just my opinion. I think when you come to England and you see everyone talking in your slang and in your language and on the pages that you follow and criticizing you so publicly, it really takes a toll on you, I'm sure. So I know that, Garnacho has been linked to Napoli. I would love for him to go to Napoli, maybe get on the end of some of those Kevin De Bruyne passes, because he is a willing runner and De Bruyne thrives off of willing runners. Conte as that sort of stern leader, perhaps he can kind of put something in place that nurtures but also controls Garnacho a little bit and also maximizes his quality based on how he would profile him. But yeah, wherever he does go, I think he does have the potential to be a really strong player. Not necessarily a fan of him doing this, but at the end of the day, it's his own life, it's his own teammate. He feels like he's been treated badly by the manager and the club, and he doesn't owe the club anything in terms of trying to get them a better salary, because they're his employers. As much as we like to romanticize and attach extra meaning to football clubs as fans, these footballers are employees, and their employers are, their businesses. And for Garnacho, he's going to leave. It's a bit sour, but he doesn't necessarily owe anyone anything, even though that sounds hard to take. But that's the case. He's not a diehard Manchester United fan from boyhood. If he was, that would be different, and I don't think people would do that. But yeah, in this case, obviously, I suppose that's the rationale. And I'm, United fans to be aggrieved with him for that. I think they're, well within their rights to do so as well. But I suppose I've tried to paint a balanced picture of why that has been happening and where Garnacho might be able to move to, and given my opinions on his quality in general. Let me know what you think of this whole saga. It's probably been blown a little bit out of proportion in general by the online sphere, but he knew what he was doing in getting people talking, and I've talked, so I want to hear what you guys have to say in the comments below. Let me know.